New week, Parashat Behar, Bechukotai, end of 7 vayikra. We are finishing our third cycle of these videos. And next week we will start our fourth cycle. This week we discussed the Yovel, the Jubilee that we find at the beginning of the Parsha. However, if you do not learn the Torah in Hebrew, you miss so much out of this concept of a Yovel, of counting, of Sfirah, and this is what we discussed in this week's video.
Yeah, we saw the concept of lispol. What is the essence of counting? Why do we need to count? Why don't we just get to the Yovel, have a date when it appears? No, we have to count. There's an essence, there's meaning behind the word lispol, safar, and also the meaning behind the word Yovel, which we get to at the end. We focus both on these words and the meaning of these numbers, the 7 and the extra 7 and the 50, all that we touched upon on this video.
Exactly, there's so much to unpack in the concept of a Yovel because Yovel appears different times in the Torah with different meanings. How are these all connected? It's so much deeper than what you think. It's not just a Jubilee, it's not just the 50th year. There's so much more behind this concept of a Yovel. Make sure you take a look. Hope you enjoy it. New week, end of Sefer Vayikra, Parashat Behar, Bechukotai. We'll just take a moment to recognize, like we do every year, that with this Parsha, we will be finishing another cycle of these videos. Baruch Hashem, we've been doing it now for 3 years. And in Mitzvah Hashem, next week, we will be starting the 4th year of doing these videos. So it's been a great ride. Thank you very much to everyone who's been watching and all the comments that we receive and all the follow-ups and all the questions. This is extremely fulfilling for ourselves, for us, but also we hope you enjoy them. And as usual, if you do like this, please feel free to share the videos around. Comment on YouTube as always. And of course, if you haven't yet subscribed to the channel, please consider subscribing. Help us grow the channel. So this week, what I want to talk about, the beginning of the Parsha. Last year, we discussed Shemitah that we find at the beginning of the Parsha. Last year was a Shemitah year, and we talked about Shemitah. This year, I want to talk what happens just after that. After the Shemitah, the Torah tells us about this concept of a Yovel, of a Jubilee, of what happens every 50 years. And this is very interesting for 2 reasons. First of all, what is this Yovel about? What is a Yovel? What's behind this idea? What's behind this concept? But more interesting, when you look in the Psukim, you find that in order to get to that Yovel, we have to count 7 years like we do for the Shemitah. And then we take those 7 years and we count them 7 times. And then we get to 49 and then we get to the 50th year. So what exactly is going on over here? What is this counting about? We talked about in the past about Shavuot being on the 50th day after counting 49 days from Pesach to Shavuot. But also here we have to ask, what is this counting about? If you want to give a date, if you want to give a time, say a time, give a date. Why do we have to count this year plus another year, then 7, and then 7 times 7? What is going on? So what is Yovel about, and what is this concept of counting? Why is it so important that this is how the Torah says, Usfatem lachem sheva shanim sheva pe'amim?
Yeah, it's very interesting. It does actually seem that there's a special focus on the counting process itself. It's as if you can't get to that 50th year suddenly. Oops, wow, it's the 50th year, let's do Yovel. No, you have to count step by step, year after year. And maybe that's what the Torah is teaching us. You know, time, days, years can be chaos. Here's another day, another moment. We can see time as just a collection of many, many, many moments. Some are better, some are worse, some are productive, some are we're sitting and doing nothing. And the Torah is teaching us here, both in Sfirat HaOmer and in talking about the Yovel, is that it doesn't work like that. Time is something you're supposed to use. You're supposed to step by step. When you count something, on the one hand, you're making significance of each one. And we've spoken about this in the past about counting people. You're isolating, singling out each one, but you're doing more than that because you don't go 1, 1, 1, you go 1, 2, 3, meaning you're singling them out, but then you're connecting them all together. You're saying that each day has its importance, but each day steps upon the day before, and you should be growing. You don't just find yourself on Yovel. Yovel is something that you build up to. You don't just find yourself on Shavuos, on Matan Torah. It's something that you build up to day after day. Don't see time as just there. See it as a process. Make sure you're using your time creating a step-by-step process. And this is the essence of the word lispor. We've spoken about the concept of even sapir, of singling out, isolating, creating something that it stands on its own. But lispor also is sipur, is a story. A story has a storyline. Each part of the story builds up to the next part. When we're counting, we're connecting things into a process. But it's interesting because the psukim don't say count 49. It says count 7, 7 and then do that 7 times, and guess what? Suddenly it's going to be 49. Why that way? Why not say count 49? Because there's another aspect of counting. When I count to 49, sometimes all I'm thinking about is 49, is the end goal. And I don't see the steps on the way. But when the Torah says count 7, because 7 we know is a full cycle. The number 7 represents completeness in this world. And this shows up in many different places. And when I complete a cycle, I should recognize it as its own cycle. It's not just on the way to Yovel. It's a thing of itself. So on the one hand, we want to process, but on the other hand, we want to recognize each step on the way and not just step over everything just to get to that end goal. But then surprisingly, when we complete 49, we've taken all these 49 parts and put them together into one puzzle. What happens? Nothing. On the 49th year, nothing happens. We completed the full puzzle. Then once we've completed the full puzzle, then comes the 50th year, which is interesting. The 50th day, both in Sfirat HaOmer and the 50th year, are not part of our counting. We always assume we count to Shavuot. No, we don't. We count to a day before Shavuot. We count to a year before Yovel. And I think there's a very deep idea here, because we live in a world that in Chassidut and Kabbalah is described as Alma de Peruda, the world of separation. We've discussed this in the past. The world is many details. Godliness is one, but he created a world where everything seems to not go together, to contradict. We have good and bad and days and minutes and many details. What our goal in this world is bringing them always together, is tying these details together. The process of Sfirat HaOmer and the process of 49 years is all about bringing all these moments, bringing all these aspects together and creating a full picture. And we take one piece and the other piece, and when we create that full puzzle, we don't have 49 pieces. Once we've created those 49 pieces, we're suddenly elevated to a point beyond those separations. It's not that we have a bunch of pieces, but we've grouped them together. It's that we've able, by bringing all the pieces together, to go back to that initial stage, to that point before all separated, where we meet godliness in its oneness. And maybe that's why in the Yovel, and that's the name of Yovel, Yovel is the shofar. We know Bimshocha Yovel in Matan Torah, the 50th day. Bimshocha Yovel Hema Yalu Bahar, the idea of the Yovel and the shofar. The shofar is about going to that initial sound, that sound before it breaks up into words, before it separates. It's even before words. It's that initial day, Rosh Hashanah. We go back to the day of creation, before everything came about, before things spread out into pieces. We want to connect to that initial day, but not by going backwards. We don't want to go back in time. We want to take the world and bring all those pieces together, and through creating that puzzle, elevate to a point that's beyond all those separations. And on that day, we hear the shofar, but more than that, we set the slaves free, the lands return to their initial owners. We reach a certain freedom, a certain purity, where we go back to that initial stage oneness before all the complications came about.
Beautiful, beautiful. There's a very deep meaning really behind this idea of counting towards something. When you lispor in Hebrew, then you create a sipur, you create a story, you create a process out of it. It's not just different aspects in life, different points in time that are scattered out there. It's actually gathered together and you make a story out of them, out of life. This is what the counting is about. And like you were saying, there's also a very deep meaning behind this concept of a Yovel. Like you mentioned, Yovel, which is also a shofar. But actually, it's not only just a shofar, it's more than that. And like we like to do in our videos to talk about the Hebrew language, the deep reasoning and meaning behind the Hebrew words the Torah uses, when we look at these few psukim, we find this word Yovel appearing different times. And maybe this is because the shoresh of Yovel, Yud, Bet, Lamed, has 4 different meanings in the Torah. Like you mentioned, one of them is a shofar. Bimshocha Yovel Hema Yalu Bahar, like we find in Ma'amad Har Sinai. That a Yovel could also be a shofar, like Rashi points out over there. Not just any shofar, but the shofar from an aisle, from the Akedat Yitzchak, the ram that was caught in Akedat Yitzchak, the shofar that we use on Rosh Hashanah, the specific shofar that we have on Rosh Hashanah, that specific sound, which was on Ma'amad Har Sinai, that specific sound for Rosh Hashanah is also a Yovel. But it's not only a shofar like we see over here, v'ikra dror. It's a year that you call out for freedom, just like a shofar calls out. It's also Yovel from the idea of years that you count together, 49 years in order to get to a Yovel, which this year is some kind of a restart to the world, some kind of a restart to our lives. Like you were saying, it's a time in which everything goes back to the beginning. Everything goes back to the basic. Like the shofar is the most basic voice, the most basic noise. It's just a sound without any words, without any sentences. It has has no meaning. It's just a noise, just like babies do before they can learn how to talk. This is what the Yovel is for us, for our world. It's taking us back, going back to that beginning, going back to that initial time where everything starts all over again. To, like you were saying, to this pure time, lev tahor bara li lukim veruach nachon chadesh bekirbi, to this pureness, to this beginning where everything restarts, just like on Rosh Hashanah for each year, but also one time in our lives, once every 50 years, everybody gets to restart, everybody gets their land back, everybody gets their produce back, the produce that grew out from the field, the Yevul in Hebrew, the Tuvia, the Yevul, Yud, Bet, Lamed, again, that's another word that grew out in these fields, doesn't belong to anybody this year, and from this year onwards, the fields go back to the first original owners, and the original owners get to start again, and get to plant again, and get to rebuild their own lives, rebuild their own financial life with their own land. This is what happens in the Yovel. But then, besides all that, a Yovel, Yud, Bet, Lamed, is also from the word of Nachal Yuval, from the concept, from the shorish of to lead, to begin something, like we were saying. And very interestingly, again, when you look in the Torah, when you go back to see where did this shorish, where did this root appear for the first time, we find it in Cain descendants, by the kids of Lemech, by the boys of Lemech. He had 3 sons, and all 3 of them were based on this shorish, on the Yud, Bet, Lamed, Yuval, Yovel, Toval, and all 3 of them began something in the world. We don't know anything about the descendants of Cain. We follow Shet's descendants. We are from Noach, which came out of Shet. But when we talk about Cain, we get to Lemech, and then the Torah mentions his 3 sons and his daughter that married off Noach. But those 3 sons had something to them, that they created something new in the world. They led a revolution in the world, each one in their own aspect, in music, in building weapons, in building machinery. Each one of them led something in the world, began something new in the world, and taking that shorish of Yud, Bet, Lamed back to over here. Maybe this is what the Yovel is about. It's about taking that 50th year, the Yovel, and leading a new life, a lehovil, a new life with the Yevul, with the produce that you produce from the fields, with what you grow from the field, leading a new life in our professional level, in our professional lives, but also in our spiritual lives, with sounding off that noise, that shofar, to take us back to where we began, to the lev tahor bara li lukim veruach nachon chadesh bekirbi, to that place where we are pure from the beginning, where we have nothing caught onto us, and we get to restart all over again. This is what the Yovel is about. This is what this 50th year is about. Again, this year that happens for the majority of us only once in a lifetime, because this is the chance, the one chance in a lifetime that we get to restart everything, also on the spiritual level, also on the materialistic level, to restart our lives and to lead a new life from here onwards. We get this chance every 50th year, but this chance only happens after you go through the whole process, after you count this 49 years, the 7 plus 7 plus 7, 7 times 7, you're complete, and you fill up yourself for these 49 years. Then you get to that point where you can restart yourself, when you can begin your life again from this pure place, from this lev tahor that you have now gotten from HaKadosh Baruch Hu.
Beautiful. You know, it reminds me of when you put together a puzzle with a lot of pieces. There are some people that put it in a frame and then hang it up, but it doesn't look like a picture. It looks like a puzzle. You see many, many pieces, and they're there together. But if you've ever done a puzzle on an app, on a computer, what happens always in all these games is you put the puzzle together and you see all the pieces, and then suddenly there's some sound, bling, maybe that's the shofar, and then the full picture appears. It doesn't show you the picture with the pieces. You've achieved that level. You've brought the pieces together, and now you elevate to the level where there are no pieces, where there are no separations. Before the picture was separated, that picture was a picture before it was broken up into pieces. And it's interesting because there's a halachic discussion about whether Yovel is the first of the next cycle, meaning do you go 49 and then 50, but that 50 is also 50 and is also 1 in the following cycle? Or is 50 sort of its own counting, its own year? It's not part of anything. It's outside of the cycle. And we have a machloket of Chachamim and Rabbi Yehuda, and some paskin this way and some the other. But interestingly, the Rambam says that when we have a mikdash, then 50 is its own year. And when we don't, then 50 is the first year. Maybe hinting to a very deep idea that if this 50 is really our ability to go beyond this world, to really achieve that wholeness where we're able to elevate beyond this world to a point before separation, to a point above all separation, that's something that we can achieve when we have a mikdash. And when we don't have a mikdash, even if we are counting Yovel, we can't reach that level of completeness. So we have the Yovel, but that Yovel is also the first year of the next cycle. And I think that hints somewhat to what we were talking about the essence of Yovel being this moment beyond the counting, a moment we achieve achieve when we bring all the pieces together. When we do our job, then HaKadosh Baruch Hu brings us to a moment that goes even beyond that, the moment of the Yovel.
Very good, excellent. We can definitely continue talking more about Yovel, about the shofar, very similarly to the Eved Ivri on the 7th year that gets a hole in his ear because he didn't hear in Har Sinai, and then he gets out for free on the Yovel, but we're out of time, so we'll have to end here. As usual, again, like I mentioned in the beginning, if you enjoyed this, feel free to share it around. We'll just remind the viewers what we discussed the past couple of years. We discussed the Shemitah, like I said, in Parashat Bechukotai. We talked about why does Vayikra end the way it ends with the concept of Archin suddenly over there at the end of Sefer Vayikra. What is it doing there? That's not the way you would assume that Sefer Vayikra should end, but actually there's a very deep lesson over there. We'll link those two videos, and Yitzi and Hashem starting a new cycle again, Bezrat Hashem.
Shkoyach Tuvia, Shabbat Shalom.
Shkoyach to you, Shabbat Shalom, and Hashem, we'll talk again next week.